All right, so we're doing something a little backwards today, but I just got my hands on a bottle of Maker's Mark FAE-01, so I'm really excited to crack it open and review it with you guys. And then we'll compare it to Maker's Mark FAE-02, which was one of my favorite bottles from all of 2021. So let's get to it. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Hutch, and thanks so much for joining me on this journey through the world of whiskey. So man, we've got two very similar looking bottles here, two beautiful bottles by the way, and a bottle that I am super excited to dive into, and a bottle that I already love. So we're doing both of this year's limited releases from Maker's Mark, FAE-01 and FAE-02. Now, I wasn't able to get my hands on a bottle of FAE-01 when they were first coming out, mostly because I wasn't really all the way into the bourbon game by then, but was when FAE-02 was coming out, and so got a bottle of that and absolutely loved it. So really excited that I was able to get this, and now I'm just gonna crack it open with you guys, and we're gonna see how good this version is, FAE-01, and then we'll compare it to FAE-02. Pardon me while I open this up, it's a little crumbly, the wax is. All right, there we go. Yeah, that's just going on the floor. Okay. So anyway, FAE-01 is the first release from Maker's Mark this year in their limited release series. They've been doing some really interesting stuff with their wood finishing series overall. So what they do with this one is they put 10 virgin oak staves in there, and for FAE-01 they toast one side, sear one side of the stave and leave the other side raw, which is supposed to draw out complex flavors. You get both the oaky toastedness and the like fruitiness from the raw side. FAE-02, they seared both sides of it to go full texture, full oakiness. The FAE-01, just some stats on this bottle itself, it's 110.6 proof, which is 55.3% alcohol. Most Maker's Mark stuff is somewhere between 6 and 7 years old in sort of that range. And the way they vary it up is they do these cool wood finishing and wood experiments with the staves that go into the barrel. On the bottle here for FAE-01, it reads, tasting notes, a fruit-forward expression with notes of tobacco and wood. So let's see if that fruit-forward, raw side of the stave is really present here, and then we'll compare to FAE-02. Nice. All right. First pour ever of Maker's Mark FAE-01. Man, I'm excited. All right, everybody on the nose. Yeah, it's bright. Fruity for sure, like strawberries and cream. Berries and cream kind of note for me. Definitely lots of vanilla, sort of that creamy vanilla, and some caramel. And maybe a little bit of like a green apple. So like a caramel covered apple is kind of coming through now. Yeah, so definitely a fruitier nose for sure than I remember the FAE-02 being. And bright and light and really inviting for sure. I don't get much tobacco, maybe a hint of it, but it's pretty light and bright overall. Well, let's get into the palate then. Cheers, everybody. It's delightful, really good. That fruitiness carries over. I get some like green apple note, which is really interesting, and some vanilla for sure. Caramel drizzle. So that caramel apple note is pretty prominent for me, with some vanilla cream. It's almost like you had a caramel covered green apple with some vanilla cream or vanilla icing over top of it. Really interesting. Let's go back for another sip. Oh, just got a big note of tobacco on the back end there. Wow, that kind of jumped back up. That's really interesting. Wow, okay, let's go into the palate again and see if we pick up some more layers. Cheers. Interesting. So that one went a little darker. Brown sugar, for sure. Brown sugar prominent on there. Still some caramel. And then a little more tobacco-y, for sure. Really interesting. That kind of went very fruity and very bright on the first sip, and then started leaning a little bit darker and a little bit heavier on the second sip. There was also a good like baking spice note or cinnamon note in there, especially on that second sip. So nice complex whiskey, nice sort of progression. And I already noticed that little finish of tobacco, but I'm gonna go back in for one last third sip here and really focus on the finish. So cheers, everybody. Yeah. So focusing on the finish there, there's a spiciness to it, there's a tobacco note, and there's a dark chocolate note to it as well. So all good things. Really, really good whiskey. Now I get a lot of flavor, but I don't get a lot of like spicy warmth in the chest or anything. Pretty easy to sip, honestly, for 110.6 proof. That's probably the wheatedness kind of toning down some of that as well. But it starts out as this like bright, light whiskey, especially on the nose. First sip was all apple and berry and some cream. Then as I took a second sip and focused on the finish, it does go a little bit darker with some brown sugar and tobacco and even a little bit of dark chocolate kind of notes. So cool, really cool developing whiskey there, and one that I would highly recommend to basically anybody, especially for right around 60 bucks. This is what these sell for. So again, Maker's Mark, man, they do great stuff with their wood finishing series. I am looking forward to just picking up every bottle of these that I can for the foreseeable future. Now, for the moment of truth, let's compare FAE-01, which has proven very, very good today, to FAE-02, which has been one of my favorite bottles on my shelf. Really excited to see what the differences are. If either one sort of comes out ahead today, it won't be a true blind, but would love to see what's hitting my palate best today. Well, I just came from FAE-01, so let's just go right into the FAE-02 and check out that nose. Okay, so definitely darker. More of a dried fruit, pitted fruit kind of fruitiness. So this is very fruit forward with the lighter, brighter stuff, and this is darker stuff. I have to dig into this nose a little bit more. Hasn't much time to open up, obviously, but it's not jumping out of the glass as much. There's an oakiness to it and a deeper caramel note. Starting to come alive a little bit. Lots of cherry jumping out now. And vanilla. So definitely on the darker side and maybe a little bit more muted and not as vibrant as FAE-01. A little bit more deep bass tones, which requires a little bit more digging. But a pretty good nose overall. I'd say honestly the nose on FAE-01 is winning right now. But let's get into the palate and see what that does and how that's hitting today. Cheers, everybody. All right, so very different, surprisingly different for sure. So much more sweet oak on that and barrel spice, deeper tones, brown sugars and caramels right off the bat. Little undertone of vanilla. But what really stands out there is like the oak and barrel spice for sure. FAE-01 has more like baking spice notes, like you had a caramel covered apple and put some baking spices all over it. This has barrel spice, oakiness, sort of a drying quality to it in the mouth. Very, very good. Both good in their own way. Let's go back to FAE-02 just for one more sip, see if anything else developed there. Nose is staying pretty much the same, maybe a little bit more chocolate coming out. Cheers. So there's a little bit of a tobacco note coming through on that now on the back end especially, but it is darker, dark chocolate. Maybe a little bit of cherry on that sip. Honestly, it feels a little less vibrant on the tongue. Good mouthfeel, really good mouthfeel, but sort of less vibrant and jumpy than the FAE-01. This is smoother, more cohesive, FAE-02 is, and FAE-01 is sort of just more alive with sort of popping and zesty flavors. FAE-02, just a little recap on this one, it's a 109.1 proof, so very similar in proof, but a little bit less. And this one, it says a texture-forward expression that's full-bodied with notes of toasted oak and a rich, creamy finish. So I think I pretty much agree with everything that's on that. They did a great job sort of describing each of these and the differences. Definitely texture-forward, smooth, cohesive, darker, richer tones. This one is fruit-forward. FAE-01 is fruit-forward and much more vibrant and alive. So let's go back to FAE-01 one more time and take a sip coming off of FAE-02 and see if that changes anything up. Cheers. Yeah, again, on this nose, it's just, let's just do a direct comparison. More vanilla, apple, and caramel. And then brown sugar and oak. And that's just sort of the tale of these two whiskeys. Berries. Drying, maybe leather and tobacco. So surprisingly different. All right, FAE-01, one more sip here to finish it out. Cheers. Man, that green apple note for me, caramel drizzled, caramel covered green apple is just sort of stealing the show there with lots of baking spices. I do think FAE-01 is a little spikier and not as well rounded as FAE-02. It's almost like if you were going to introduce somebody who's not that into whiskey to these two whiskeys, you'd have a catch-22. You'd have the FAE-02, which is smooth and cohesive, but does have a drying leather tobacco kind of note on the back end. And you'd have the FAE-01, which is bright and fruity, but a little bit more spiky and in your face. In any case, I think both are really cool and really good and interesting whiskeys and good experiences. I'd say today, just comparing them, the FAE-01 is winning on the nose. The FAE-02 probably winning on the palate just for the smoothness. And then I might be giving the finish to FAE-01, I think. Let's go back to FAE-02 one more time and just do the finish and focus on that solely. Yeah, so that one goes like tobacco, cherry, brown sugar on the finish. Really nice. This one's a little lighter, but with a tobacco note too. Man, it's so close between these two guys. I don't know which one is winning the day, to be honest. If I had to choose, like absolutely had to pick one right here and right now, I would say FAE-01 is winning on the nose, but FAE-02 is winning on the palate and the finish. So I'd have to choose FAE-02, but I think the real tale to tell here is that if you're looking for something caramel, apple, fruity, baking spice, sort of bold, zestier flavors, I would go with FAE-01. But if you're in the mood for something a little darker, like coffee tones and rich oak, I would go with FAE-02. And I think what that shows is that Maker's Mark kind of nailed this. They knew what they had with FAE-01 and what they were shooting for, and they executed. And they knew what they had with FAE-02 and what they were shooting for, and they executed there too. So Maker's Mark, you get a little round of applause for me for two great releases this year that sort of hit on different facets of what whiskey can be. All right, so that wraps up our review of Maker's Mark FAE-01 today. Definitely a Hutch-worthy bottle. I'm so glad I was able to get my hands on this bottle, and so glad I was able to do this comparison with its counterpart FAE-02 today. Just want to say that if you're liking the content coming out of the channel, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Helps the channel grow and helps me know what kind of content to keep creating for you guys. Until I see you guys again for another video, all I can say is keep drinking good whiskey and cheers.